This week on Q&A, Democratic Congresswoman Jackie Speier of California. She talks about her memoir, Undaunted, surviving Jonestown, summoning courage, and fighting back.
Jackie Speier, your book, Undaunted, your first three words are, I was dying. Why did you decide to start the book that way?
Because I was, and because it was one of those moments in my life that were defining for me. And not many people have that experience where they're dying and then survive. So I had a lot to talk about.
Why were you dying?
I was on an airstrip in the remote jungles of Guyana, having just concluded a congressional delegation tour with then Congressman Leo Ryan, and we were ambushed on that airstrip and shot. Congressman Ryan was shot 45 times and died on that airstrip. There were members of the press that died, one defector of the People's Temple who died, and I was shot 5 times on the right side of my body. A bone jutting out of my right arm, a wound in my leg the size of a football, and it was, oh my God, I'm 28 years old. This is it. I am not going to live to be in my mid-80s. I'm not going to get married and have kids. I'm not going to have any of those dreams fulfilled.
November 1978. Why were you there?
I was then the legislative counsel to Congressman Leo Ryan, and he had decided that he wanted to take a Codell down to Jonestown, Guyana.
Congressional delegation.
Because there were many constituents of his that had loved ones, young adult children, who had gotten involved in this church in San Francisco called the People's Temple. And they had left San Francisco and taken some 900 of their congregation to this remote country in South America where, in a jungle, they had carved out a community. And these constituents wanted to know, one, were they safe? Were they there against their will? They gave us letters they wanted to make sure got directly to their children because they didn't think that they were able to communicate at all with their children. And Congressman Ryan became involved in part because no one else was interested, which is hard to believe, but the local electeds were all indebted to then Jim Jones, who as a reverend in San Francisco at the People's Temple had a couple of thousand congregants who at the moment's notice could walk precincts, could be called upon to assist in campaigns, and he used his congregation to gain power and respect. George Moscone, who was then the mayor, made him his chair of his housing authority. Meanwhile, people were starting to defect, and people were saying things like sexual abuse goes on, physical abuse goes on, people are maligned, there's money laundering going on. And so Congressman Ryan wanted to find out. We contacted the State Department. State Department said, after a visit, everything looks great. You really don't need to make a trip down. But Congressman Ryan was one of those investigative legislators. His whole career, he didn't take the opinions of someone else. He wanted to see firsthand. And so we made the trip down there.
If you've never seen Jim Jones, here is some footage of him. We don't have the date on it, but it was a couple years before 1978, and probably at the time wasn't down in Guyana. Do you remember when he went down there?
He went down there in late 1977.
Okay, he may have been. Let's just watch this so we can see what he looked like.
These are potato chips made from plantain, and they're more delicious. They're a combination of a potato chip and a French fry. And radishes, You don't know what you're missing down here? They make their own buns and hamburgers and the leafy green vegetables. By the way, we just won first prize from the national government of Guyana for our leafy green vegetables. Here are the people at the table eating an afternoon snack. You see Pepsi-Cola's here for 3 cents, American money. That sounds appetizing, doesn't it?
We got to answer because he was obviously in Guyana then.
So he was in Guyana. This was before he actually went down there with the large group. He had sent many of his followers down there earlier to kind of build the community down there, and he was trying to make it very appealing to the members of the People's Temple in San Francisco and Los Angeles. So he's pitching about how great it is down there, and who you saw down there were the people that were building Jonestown. They were the people that were clearing the jungle, the people that were building the cabins and the community.
Describe where Guyana is, please.
Guyana is in South America. It was once held by the British and then by the Danes, I believe. And it's in the northern eastern part of South America. And it became independent. And once it became independent, the country became very much a Marxist regime. And at the time, Prime Minister Burnham was the leader of the country. Jones was attracted to that country and to him in part because of the embrace of Marxism, which is something that Jones embraced as well. Also because the government was willing to, I don't know if they leased him land or gave him land in the middle of the country where the jungles were deep, and it was an opportunity for them to build their commune.
Have some video of Congressman Ryan. What was his district then?
His district was mostly San Mateo County. So it was the suburbs of San Francisco. There were a lot of whites that had children who were from comfortable homes. But it was also at a time when there was this interest in wanting to embrace the opportunity for African Americans and whites to live together. And that's the pitch that Jim Jones made. Here we will create our utopia. And ironically, once you were there, you saw that it was really less of a utopia and more of a plantation where the whites were in leadership and the African Americans were not.
How much of your district today, the 14th District of California, is the same that Leo Ryan had?
Well, it's fundamentally the same. Districts have actually gotten larger in terms of the population, and I have part of San Francisco now and virtually all of San Mateo County.
Did Leo Ryan die at the moment he was shot?
He was shot, and I was running towards him, and then he was shot again, and then he fell. And I raced under one of the wheels of the plane, and then they came at point-blank range and shot. They had targeted people they wanted to shoot, and they then shot a number of us.
Here's Leo Ryan.
I think that all of you know that I'm here to find out more about questions that have been raised about your operation here. But I can tell you right now that from the few conversations I've had with some of the folks here already this evening, that whatever the comments are, there are some people here who believe that this is the best thing that ever happened to them in their whole life.
Where were you?
So I was sitting in the back of the pavilion at a picnic table with a bench, and both of us had been sitting back there and interviewing members of the People's Temple who had family members back home, and they wanted us to deliver letters or talk to their children or young adults and try and assess whether or not they were being held there against their will. That particular clip that you just showed, the pandemonium that kind of broke out in terms of the fervor of the applause was unnatural, and it was alarming to me.
So
it was staged.
Nervous? Were you nervous at this time?
I was nervous before we made the trip. In the book, I talk about the fact that I had been in the process of buying my first home. It was a condominium in Northern Virginia, and I literally made the contract contingent on my surviving the trip to Jonestown. Actually had a sentence added to the contract because I didn't want my parents to be saddled with a piece of property 3,000 miles away. Now, I'm oftentimes asked, well, why did you go? So 1978, very few women that had leadership roles on congressional staffs. There was a staff member from the International Relations Committee who was making the trip, and I thought if I didn't go, that somehow I would be setting women back in terms of their opportunity to take on bigger positions in Congress.
What were you thinking about Jim Jones when you, and had you met him before you went to Guyana?
No, I had not met him. The weekend before we left, I sat in my office in I think the Rayburn House office building, and I was just listening to audio tapes of interviews that had been taken by one of the staff members in the district of a number of defectors, and conversation after conversation, interview after interview. It was more alarming each interview because there was a pattern there, and it spoke to me as if we were walking into a dangerous situation.
Jim Jones is from my home state of Indiana. He was born in Crete, as you know, moved to Lynn next to Richmond, and then moved to California. What can you tell us about his upbringing that led him to be involved? Actually, I forgot Indianapolis. He lived in Indianapolis. That led him to be this kind of a minister?
Well, my sense in reading about him in the books that have been written is that there was a part of him that was a loner. He was, I believe, from a broken home. And he, from an early age, was a manipulator, actually. So very young, in his early 20s, he became a, quote, pastor, unquote.
Here's an interview by Don Harris from NBC, just a short clip. Don Harris was killed. Who else was killed that you were with?
Bob Brown was killed.
And who was Bob Brown?
Bob Brown was the cameraman. Greg Robinson, who was the photographer for one of the Bay Area newspapers, was killed. There was one of the defectors was killed. And they were all remarkable people. I had just met them, and over a course of a few days had come to really respect all of them.
This was directed by a man named Stanley Nelson back in 2006, but here is Don Harris interviewing Jim Jones.
Last night, someone came and passed me this note.
He's the one that I'm just talking about. This is the man that wants to leave his son here.
Doesn't it concern you, though, that this man, for whatever reason, one of the people in your group...
People play games, friend. They lie. What can I do about liars? Are you people going to leave us? I just beg you, please leave us. Bill, we will bother nobody. Anybody wants to get out of here can get out of here. We have no problem about getting out of here. They come and go all the time. I don't know what kind of game. People like publicity. Some people do. I don't.
Is that true? You didn't like publicity?
No, actually, he lived for publicity. He was an egomaniac. He was, at one point, a charismatic leader, no doubt about it. But by the time we met him, he was on drugs. He was sweating a great deal. He appeared to not be as clear-minded as one would hope. During that interview, everything was unraveling. The tension at the pavilion was intense, and the family, the Parks family, had just come up to me and wanted to leave. And there was the older grandmother and the father and mother and a number of children. So it was unraveling before his eyes, and Don Harris is interviewing him and has shown him the note that he had showed to Congressman Ryan and myself that night after Congressman Ryan had addressed the audience there. And I had such a sinking feeling because once we received that note, I knew that everything we feared was true.
So what happened next for you? Where did you stay while you were down there?
So I stayed in a cabin with a group of members of the People's Temple, young women, and they were very modest cabins, tin roofs, and it was raining that night, so all night long. I'm just listening to the rain on the roof. And I know what tomorrow was going to bring. I couldn't sleep. And I just wanted the morning to dawn so that we could get on with taking those who wanted to leave. At that point, there were only 2 people that wanted to leave. But I wanted to be able for us to safely get out of there. But as the day wore on, of course, more and more people wanted to leave. And that became problematic because we didn't have enough planes. So Congressman Ryan was actually going to stay behind with another group of about 40 people in the People's Temple that wanted to be taken out. And I was going to take the first group out. So we got onto this dump truck with the first group of defectors and the concerned relatives who had been with us and the members of the press. And we're about to leave. And the dump truck got stuck because of the mud from the rains that had occurred overnight. And because it got stuck, we were still there when there was a knifing attempt on Congressman Ryan. And there was a huge uproar in the pavilion. And we're in the dump truck, and all of a sudden out walks Congressman Ryan. He's got blood stains on his shirt. He gets into the cab of the plane. So I didn't have an opportunity to talk to him. I was in the bed of the truck. And then we took off for the airstrip.
You got in the cab of the truck.
Right.
Yeah. You said plane, and I want to make
I'm
sure.
Sorry. No, he got into the cab of the truck.
And how far was it from the People's Temple area and the airport?
So it's hard for me to judge. I think it's about 3 miles, but it's on jungle roads, if you want to call them. They're just dirt roads. So it takes a while to get there, 35, 45 minutes. So we get to the airstrip. One plane has arrived, the smaller plane. We're waiting for the larger plane to arrive. Congressman Ryan does an interview with the members of the press about what had happened in the pavilion. And then Larry Layton, who was one of the hierarchy in the People's Temple, all of a sudden is saying he's a defector, but he had been one of the most public about his support of the People's Temple, and there was no way I wanted him on the same plane. And so I said to Congressman Ryan, I don't want him on the same plane. He says, well, then put him on the smaller plane. And then I asked Tim Reiteman, one of the reporters, if he would frisk him, because he had this big yellow poncho on. And he frisked him. Unfortunately, he did not identify that he had a gun. So I'm loading passengers on to the larger plane at this point. The first plane has been loaded. And unbeknownst to us, a tractor trailer from People's Temple had followed behind us some distance, had arrived on the airstrip. And as I was trying to coax a small Guyanese child out of the plane, who had just scampered onto it, the gun shots rang out. And I at first didn't even know what was happening because my back was to the tractor trailer. But they started jumping off the tractor trailer and started shooting. People scattered. And I started to run. Congressman Ryan was hit, fell, and then I fled under the plane and hid by one of the wheels.
Where were you hit? When were you shot?
I was shot towards the end, in terms of my recollection. I was playing dead. I was lying on my side with my head down, so the whole right side of my body was the most visible for the gunmen, and they came at point-blank range and shot us.
How close is point-blank for you? Can you remember?
Well, my head is down.
Your head's down?
My head is down.
And did they shoot you when your head was down?
Yes.
And how long was it while you were there before you got to a hospital?
Well, I was on that airstrip for almost 22 hours without medical attention.
You couldn't move?
Well, I was able to get my body up at one point, and they shoved me into the cargo hold of the plane, thinking maybe this plane was going to take off, but it had bullet holes through the engine. And
who's they, by the way, at this point?
Well, those who were survivors who were still there. Some just ran into the bush. And then, obviously, the plane wasn't going anywhere. I was finally taken out by some Guyanese, local Guyanese. They placed me on the side of the airstrip, unfortunately, on an anthill. But as I tell people, you don't sweat the small stuff when you're dying. Eventually, they moved the most wounded into a tent. where we spent the night. And I got through the night out of the goodness of the producer from NBC and one of the reporters who came and brought Guyanese rum to the tent from a bar that was in Matthews Ridge that was some distance away. And I took swigs of this Guyanese rum to just dull the pain.
You know, there's no pictures in your book of you after you've been wounded, but I found one, as I'm sure you know, is on Google, of you and your husband, and you're wearing a sleeveless dress. That right arm of yours is a mess, and I don't mean that. I mean you know that. What in the world? How did you survive all this?
So, I mean, the right arm was actually it's not nearly as scarred and damaged as my leg. The irony of all this is that my whole right side of my thigh was blown up. But the femoral artery wasn't severed. Mm. And if the femoral artery had been severed, I would have bled to death in 90 seconds. I remember when we got to Georgetown, Guyana, where there's a U.S. medevac plane waiting, and there was this beautiful white, shiny plane with the words United States of America on it. And it was like someone had just wrapped me in the American flag. And I was lifted into that plane, and one of the medics or technicians who was on the plane said to me later when he had called to talk to me, he said, "I asked would I ever dance again?" And he looked at me and he said, "Yes, you will, and I want the first dance." But he said, I was so close to death. I was like minutes away from dying. And at 2 or 3 times during the flight, they were going to put the plane down. I think once in Puerto Rico and once in Louisiana, because they didn't think I was going to make it to Andrews. So I went through lots of surgeries, and it took me years to come to grips with the scars and realizing that it was my new reality, and I could move on with my life and not feel like somehow I was incomplete.
I want to come back to that in a moment, but this, as I remember reading, it was 5-something in the afternoon when you were shot. What happened as you're there on the ground for the next 22 hours? What happened at the People's Temple?
At the People's Temple, this is before cell phones. So during the night, we got word that they had done that White Knight trial that they had tested many times, where he was, testing the commitment that his members had to him, and they would, the megaphones would blare, and they would say, "Everyone, come out of your cabins. We're going to have a White Knight. We're going to leave this world. We're going to be resurrected." And people would all come to the pavilion, and then he would give them something to drink, but it was nothing. But this night, everyone came to the pavilion, and they had injected the children with cyanide. They had cyanide Kool-Aid and Flavor Aid, and people were told to drink it. And within minutes, they were dead.
How many?
Over 900.
Were there really 300 children?
Over 300 children. So when people say it was a mass suicide, it was not a mass suicide. They were forced to drink this toxic brew by Jones, and he had many of his guards surrounding the pavilion, I'm sure, to make sure that people did as they were told.
Here's some audio. There's no video that I know of Jim Jones talking to this 900 people group as he was leading them to the cyanide.
Children, it will not hurt if you'll be quiet. If you'll be quiet. If you'll quit, tell them they're dying. If you adults will stop some of this nonsense, adults, I call on you to stop this nonsense. I call on you to quit exciting your children when all they're doing is going to quiet rest. I call on you to stop this now. If you have any respect at all, are we black, proud, and socialist, or what are we? Now stop this nonsense. Don't carry this on anymore. You're exciting your children.
What happened to him?
He was shot in the head, either by a self-inflicted gunshot wound or having someone do it for him. But those voices of those children haunt me. How they could be taken like that. How one man could have such control over people that they lose their independence, their ability to think, their the mind control that was clearly at work there. Now, there were a few people that did flee into the jungle that night, but very few.
What happened to Larry Layton, who was one of the People's Temple members after you were shot?
So he was placed on the smaller plane. He then had a gun on him, started to shoot some of the defectors on the plane. They were injured, but his gun was wrestled from his hands and was somehow pushed out of the plane. The plane took off. And, you know, I'm on this airstrip thinking my parents are never going to even know what happened to me because we were in such a desolate place. But what I didn't know is that within minutes, the pilot that was able to take off in that smaller plane was reporting on his radio about what was going on the ground.
Who did the shooting in the first place, besides Layton, when they came off of that, where they had a truck or something that came on to where the landing was?
I don't know which members of the People's Temple they were, but they did the shooting. They then got back on that tractor trailer and went back to the People's Temple commune there, where I presume most of them died as well.
Were they all Americans?
Yes.
Let me go to this book, because we're just one chapter practically in this book. Why did you write this book, and what's your goal?
So this is the 40th anniversary of Jonestown. It seemed like a good time to kind of close this particular chapter. It also was an opportunity for me to talk about all the experiences of my life that have shaped me. And I wanted it to be a survival guide to people to be able to overcome obstacles that come their way, and also a political guide for women in politics, because there were a lot of things I learned in the process of my elective career that I thought would be helpful to those who came after me.
You give credit in the back for your co-writer, a woman named Alioto. How is she related to the former mayor of San Francisco?
She's actually the daughter of the former mayor of San Francisco, the late mayor of San Francisco.
How did you two get together, and then how did you work out writing the book?
So 14 years later, I am pregnant with our second child, and my husband was killed in an automobile accident by a young driver who had no brakes and ran a red light. I was pregnant with our second child, and our son was 5.5 years old. So I experienced what it was like to be a widow and have your life just pulled out from under you. And, before then I thought, well, Guyana was, my share of grief. Everyone gets their share of grief in life. And then after my husband was killed, after we had had 2 miscarriages, after a failed adoption, I realized that, we're not necessarily given our fair share. We're just given what we're given, and it's our challenge to kind of, move on with our lives. So as a result of that experience, another friend subsequently lost her husband, and I went to her support, and it became a paying it forward. So Kathleen Alioto's husband, Joe Alioto, the former mayor, dies of prostate cancer, and we took her to lunch. And over the course of time, we took more and more people, more and more widows to lunch, and we created this Merry Widows Club. And we meet, here it's, many years later, and we meet 3 or 4 times a year and celebrate life and help each other through what have been really challenging times. So Kathleen's daughter helped me write the book.
Well, there's so much here, and it's a short book. It's, I don't know, what is it, 175 pages long. What part of this book, telling about your life, was the hardest for you beyond Guyana?
The sexual abuse by my grandfather when I was quite young.
Explain that.
It's the first time I've ever talked about it publicly. I certainly talked to my mother about it. I've shared it with my husbands and friends. But it was the first time I talked about it publicly. And as I was writing the book, and I was, focusing in on some of the issues that have been so foremost in my political career, domestic violence, rape, sexual assault in the military, sexual assault on college campuses, sexual harassment, I thought to myself, why are these issues why do I have such a, almost a fixation with them? Why such a passion about them? And all of a sudden it clicked. And it was the fact that it emanated from that childhood experience where my grandfather sexually abused me.
At what age?
It's when it happens when you're young, you don't remember how old you actually are. I think I was 6, 7 years old, maybe 8, and I had spent my life just putting it behind me. And then I realized when I was writing the book that I really did need to talk about it. We need to take it out from the shadows behind the curtains, because it happens in families all the time. And children are shamed by it, and it does affect you the rest of your life. In my case, I realized that it affected me in a way that I had to overcome it by trying to make sure it didn't happen to other people.
Let me go through some of the details of your life. After the Guyana thing, you ran for Congress. What year and what happened?
So I am hospitalized for 2 months. I come back on a weekend, on a Friday. There's so much energy and attention and family members and friends. And I'm realizing over the weekend, it's the first time I wasn't feeling pain. I was still in pain, but I was other directed. And so on that Monday, it was the last day that you could take out papers to run for the unexpired term of Congressman Ryan. So I went to the county courthouse. My whole hand is in a contraption because my radial nerve had been blown away, and they didn't know if I was ever going to be able to use my hands, my fingers again. And I took out papers to run for his office. Part of it was to carry on his legacy, but part of it was for emotional healing. I wanted to stop being a victim. I wanted to be a survivor. And I saw this as a way of trying to move forward with my life. So, 6-week campaign, that's all I had. It was a joke in many respects. It was family and friends and gum and baling wire, and it's kind of laughable when you think about it. I spent $27,000 on that campaign. I raised only $20,000, so I was in debt $7,000 at the end of that campaign, and I lost.
How big?
So I came in third among the Democrats. It was a special election, so I'd say, but I was probably fourth. And the person who won was the chief of staff to Congressman Ryan in that special, and a Republican county supervisor. The two of them then had the runoff, and the county supervisor won. His name was Royce, and he served for only 18 months, and then Congressman Tom Lantos was elected.
But you tell a story in there about a chief of staff who sexually assaulted you. Was this the same guy?
Same guy.
The guy that beat you. What did he do and when?
So it was, when I was on the staff of Congressman Ryan, he was the chief of staff, and we had been working late one night, and he just came up to me and put me up against the wall and kissed me and stuck his tongue down my throat. And I just kind of recoiled from it, and just made sure I never was in the room again alone with him, and went on with my life, so to speak, except when the Me Too movement came to be. And I thought, this happens to so many women. It happens to so many women in Congress. We have got to take advantage of this moment and make sure it doesn't happen anymore.
Where is he today?
He's passed away.
Did you ever speak publicly about it when he was alive?
No, I did not.
Did you ever confront him when he was alive?
No, I did not. It was, for me, it was this one incident. And I told the story when I told it, not so much to draw attention to me as much as I wanted staffers on the Hill to know that I had endured something like that and that I could relate to them. And lots of women came to talk to me because of their experiences.
After you got a law degree at Hastings Law School out in San Francisco, at what point did you run for office again, and what did you win?
So the following year, I ran for the Board of Supervisors in San Mateo County against a 20-year incumbent, and all the political pundits said I had no chance. 20-year incumbent, connected to the business community. And I won that race and became the youngest member ever elected to the Board of Supervisors in San Mateo County.
What year would that have been?
That was in 1980.
How long were you on that board?
6 years.
Then what?
Then I ran for the state assembly. I was not the chosen candidate. Speaker Willie Brown did not want me elected to the state assembly because he saw me as being too independent. They made sure no money from the interests in Sacramento would be contributed to my campaign. They bussed staffers from Sacramento down to the district to walk precincts. I was running against someone who was on a city council, who was the mayor of one of the larger cities in the district, and whose brother-in-law was a seated member in the state assembly. So I had a 14-point lead in March, and by June 1st, it was neck and neck. And I won that race by a little more than 500 votes out of 40,000 votes cast.
How long were you in the assembly?
I was in the assembly for 10 years, was term limited out, and then ran for the state senate. 2 years later, got elected and served there for 8 years.
You ran for lieutenant governor. What happened?
I lost again. I lost. I lost in the Democratic primary, ironically to John Garamendi, who's now a member of Congress as well. I lost by 3 percentage points, and he then got elected to lieutenant governor and then left in the middle of his term because I guess it wasn't as satisfying as he hoped it would be, and came and joined me in Congress.
And when did you run for the seat in Congress, and when did you win?
So I had no intentions of ever coming back to Congress. After I lost for lieutenant governor, I went to work in a law firm in San Francisco. And then I had one of my campaign consultants on his own, because he was so disappointed that I hadn't won the lieutenant governor's race and he had done all my polling, did a poll and just showed that if I were head-to-head with Congressman Tom Lantos, that I would beat him. And I thought, well, I'm not going to do that. But I wanted to know if he was ever going to, when he was going to retire. He had been in Congress for almost 30 years. And we were going to meet and talk. But before that ever happened, he announced that he was not going to run for re-election. And so then I decided to run. He endorsed me. And then a month later, he died of esophageal cancer. And I went from being a candidate to being a member of Congress in 4 months.
That was what year?
April 2008.
I want you to go back on the personal level again, a lot of personal stories here. You talk about worrying about your body had changed and all that, and the first guy that you were dating, tell us that story, because it didn't end well.
So once I was on the Board of Supervisors, I started dating a fellow member on the Board of Supervisors. We announced our engagement And, you know, it was a pretty heady time. It was just quite exciting. There was these big issues about, well, where are they going to live, because you had to live in a district. And you know, up until that point, it was always hard to date because I really had to make sure that they appreciated that my body was scarred. And if anyone was going to recoil from, you know, touching me, then that was going to be a problem. So we were engaged. We were waiting for the Catholic Church to annul his 2 previous marriages, because I wanted to be married in the Catholic Church. And then it's into our 2nd year. He's decided not to run for re-election to the board. And we both had events to go to one night. He was going to go have dinner with his father. I was going to present a certificate at an event. And I go to the event, and lo and behold, his father is at the event. So I come back to the condo, and he comes in, and I said, so how was dinner with your dad? And he carried on for a few minutes, and I said, well, it's funny, your dad was at this event. And he then tells me that he was with another woman, and my whole life started to be shattered all over again.
What did you say to him?
I was just stunned. I mean, we were engaged to be married. I just couldn't understand it. But, you know, there's a plan for each of us, and that wasn't to be.
You name him in the book. Is he still alive?
No, he's not.
Dr. Sierra. How did you meet him?
So he was the
Sierra or Sienna?
Sierra.
Sierra, okay.
He was the chief of staff at the county hospital, where I was on the county hospital's board. He was also the chief of the emergency department. And one of the DAs came to me one day and said, you know, we're not getting convictions on rape cases that we could. And I said, so what's the problem? He says, well, it's the chain of custody of the evidence. And I said, well, that should be something we can fix. So I called the head of the hospital, and I said, you know, I'd like to schedule a meeting. Let's see what we can figure out here. So Steve was chief of staff. He's at the meeting. We decide that this is something we want to undertake. And there was some training video done in another county that we requested, and he calls me one day and says, we've got this video. I says, oh, great, maybe I'll come over to the hospital and I'll watch it, because I needed to make a presentation to the board to get the funding for this project. He says, well, what if I bring the video to your house, because you'll be interrupted here? And I'm thinking, this is kind of crazy. And I says, well, I don't have a VCR. He says, well, I'll bring one. So he shows up at my condo with a VCR, the tape, and 2 bottles of wine. And I called that the rape tape date. And so, you know, that was, you know, a remarkable relationship on every level. And so we had lots of ups and downs in our life together, because, you know, I had a number of miscarriages, one at 17 weeks, and then we adopted a baby, and 10 days later the birth mother wanted to take the baby back. And
tell more about that, because I distinctly remember that from the book. What happened? So,
you know, we're so thrilled. We have this little baby. I'm in Sacramento. We're in the middle of the final budget debate on the budget. So the budget's finally voted on at 1 a.m. in the morning. I'm holding this little infant in my arms. And
How did you get that infant in the first place?
This infant, actually, it was a situation where a mother came in to the ED and wanted to deliver this baby and put it up for adoption. And then, you know, we made the request.
Right there.
Yeah. So I'm holding this little infant in my arms, and I get back to our place in Sacramento, and the babysitter's there. I says, you know, would you try to give him his feeding in the morning, because I just want to get a couple of hours of sleep. And so she wakes me at, 6 or 7 in the morning, and she says, Steve's on the phone. And I take the phone. He says, the birth mother wants the baby back. And I'm thinking, oh my God. So the birth mother and the grandmother drive up to Sacramento. I give the baby, back to his mom and grandmother and all of the baby, the baby seat and everything else. I'm then
Wait, how can they do that?
Well, because it was 6 months. You have a 6-month period of time before you have real custody of a adoptee. So I'm driving home that day, and I'm sobbing, and I'm, Jackson's in his car seat in the back of the car, and I'm talking to my husband. I said, "Why do these bad things keep happening to us?" And he says, "No, wait a minute. Think about this. We've got this wonderful son. We're healthy. We can try again." Now, at this point, I'm 43 years old, 42, 43 years old. We'll try again. So, we go to the fertility specialist, who basically says, based on the age of your eggs and your medical history, you have a 10% chance of getting pregnant with in vitro. So, it wasn't nice hearing it that way, but we decided that was, that was the plan. So we were moving on with our lives, closing that chapter, grateful that we had our son. It was a very expensive procedure, and it wasn't covered by insurance at the time. So 10% chance, $10,000 a procedure, it didn't make a lot of sense. And so then I started running for Secretary of State of California. And lo and behold, time passes, and I'm thinking, why is this time of the month coming and going, and I'm not, cycling through my menses? And so I, go down to Walgreens at 11 o'clock at night, get the pregnancy test that never turned the right color at all the times I had tried it before, and sure enough, it does. And I call Steve, who was at the emergency room. I say, "Honey, guess what? I think I'm pregnant." And he says, "What was it, immaculate conception?" And, so he says, "Come down to the hospital. Let's get a blood test." So we do. And he calls me the next morning. He says, "You are pregnant." Now, I'm 43 years old at the time. Chances were next to nil that I was going to get pregnant with in vitro, and I got pregnant naturally.
What was the child, girl or boy?
Girl.
But you then told us earlier that when you were pregnant with the girl, what's her name, Stephanie?
Stephanie.
That Steve was killed.
So I'm 6 weeks, well, I'm about 2 months pregnant with her. And I'd been on bed rest for a few days because I had some spotting. And that night, Steve and Jackson walk into the bedroom, and Jackson's got this rose behind his back, and he brings it over to me, and it was just such a sweet moment. And then the next morning, I'm off to Sacramento to give a speech to the California Bankers Association, and it's raining torrentially, and I'm with my district director, and the phone rings in the car, and my staff is saying, the San Mateo police have just called. There has been an accident, and Steve is at the hospital. So, we turn the car around. We're heading back. I call the hospital. I'm talking to this surgeon who's a friend, and I could hear it in his voice. He says, "You should hurry up." I get to the hospital, and they make me wait an interminable period of time, and finally they let me in to see him in the ICU, and he's breathing, he's on a respirator, and he's brain dead. It was the hardest day of my life. I then had to go pick up my son from kindergarten, bring him back to the hospital, and have him say goodbye to his dad. And then I waited for his brother to fly down from Oregon. And then I had to agree to let them pull the plug. And I walked out of the room.
Your daughter was born how many months later?
About 6 months later.
How long did you stay single?
I was single for 8 years. Single mom, raising these 2 children, and God loved my late husband, but he was horrible in finances, so I was financially 3 months from bankruptcy. And friends came together, my family came together and helped me kind of patch a financial solution together. And so for 8 years I was a single mom. Kissed a lot of frogs during that time.
Where did you meet Barry Dennis?
It was a blind date set up by Kathleen Alioto.
The wife of Joe Alioto, the former mayor of San Francisco.
Who was one of the married widows. And he had no interest in me. She asked him over 5 times before he said, okay, I'll meet with her. I'll go have a glass of wine with her.
What was he doing?
He was and is an investment consultant to pension funds, and he's a fly fisherman, and he's an introvert. So, 2 bookends, I guess, or 2 sides of a coin. But he's been an extraordinary man in my life, and adopted both the kids, and.
You say in the book, though, you had some problems with Stephanie.
Yeah, it took her a number of years to get to the point where she wanted him to adopt her. Jackson was happy to have it happen right away, but she was not. So, she had basically lived, 6 or 7 years of her life with me as her, only parent, and all of a sudden she was sharing me. So it took her a while. And the truth is they went through some period of time of counseling when she was in high school. But, we all had those bumps, and we just worked through them. And
what year did you get married?
We got married in 2001.
And your 2 kids today are how old, and what are they doing?
So Stephanie is now 24, and she is a reporter and anchor at a ABC affiliate in Colorado Springs, and Jackson is a software engineer at LinkedIn.
After all these years and the damage that was done to your body back in 1978, what kind of shape are you in? How physically do you have any limitations?
It's funny that you should ask that, because I have, I have been able to work through most things. I just went through ankle surgery, but it's unrelated to having been shot in Guyana. It has more to do with wearing high heels on marble floors for 40 years. So I have been so lucky. I have been so lucky, and the book is an effort to give people hope. From heartache, you can have hope. From grieving, you can have healing. That there really is a plan for each of us. We're not always privy to what that plan is, but you just have to have faith that you will be able to survive, and you will. I have been so lucky to have my family and my friends and my faith to hold on to, and it's been all the source of strength that I've needed to get through these tough times.
As you run for Congress in the area you're in, and I know you win big, do you ever have a situation where you don't have an opponent?
I have had a couple of elections when I didn't have an opponent, or one where I became the nominee of both the Republicans and the Democrats. That was when I was in the state legislature, and you could file at the time as a Republican write-in, which I did, and became the Republican nominee.
Do you have any desire to run for any other office?
No, I do not.
And your own thinking now, how long do you want to be a congressperson?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question either. I do think there is a time and place for each of us to serve, and a time when we need to make way for another generation of leaders. I'm not sure I'm there yet, but I recognize that I have more to contribute And I would like to do that and serve my constituents for a period of time. I don't know how long that's going to be.
How long did it take you to do this book?
Oh, it took about 2 years. It took about 2 years.
What was the hardest story in the book to tell?
The sexual abuse by my grandfather. I struggled with whether to talk about it or not.
Did you leave anything out?
Ooh, good question. I probably left things out that were better left unsaid, that weren't really, significant parts of my life. It's also a book for, I think sometimes people presume that as, a member of Congress, you've had this, really sweet life, that things have always kind of gone well for you. That was not my story at all, both professionally with my losses and personally through not just the physical assault, but through just the dating experience and the struggling as a single mother. So, but we can all survive and we can all thrive, and I hope that that's part of what the message is here.
How hard was it to sell this book to a publisher?
Well, I did have a literary agent, and she was terrific. So that was great. In the House, unlike the Senate, we can't take an advance. So I guess that makes it easier to sell too. But
can you take the money that is made off of a book like this?
You can take the royalties if you ever, get to that point.
From
yes.
your experience of this, would you write another book? And if you did, what kind of thing would you talk about?
I think if I wrote another book, it would be to young women about how to be sassy.
The name of this book is Undaunted, Surviving Jonestown, Summoning Courage, and Fighting Back. Our guest has been Jackie Speier, Congresswoman from the 14th District of California. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Great to be here.
Free transcripts, or to give us your comments about this program, visit us at Q&A.org. Q&A programs are also available as C-SPAN podcasts.